Ja, herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Ausgabe SE Talk. Wir haben hier sozusagen ein Interview jetzt reingeschoben zwischen meine Interviews, die ich in Vancouver gemacht habe. Warum habe ich eines reingeschoben? Almonty Industries habe ich heute bei mir, der Louis Black, der CEO und President von der Company. Und ja, die haben heute eine eigentlich eine sensationelle News gehabt. Generell habe ich die Company schon länger auf der Agenda. Warum? Wolfram, also Tungsten. Das ist eigentlich das Commodity, das es heute geht. Wobei es geht nicht nur um Tungsten, sondern es geht auch um Molybden. Und ja, und der Luis, der hat heute eine News rausgebracht, wo es eigentlich um ein Offtake-Agreement geht mit SEAH Group. Das sagt jetzt noch nicht wirklich viel, aber das ist der koreanische Steel-Gigant, der auch mit SpaceX Contractor ist, um eine Molybden Offtake Agreement. Und Molybden war eigentlich bei Almonty momentan überhaupt noch kein Thema, hat aber dementsprechend den Kurs befeuert. Luis, thank you for your time and thank you, especially this day. It's a very business intensive day, I would say, for you. Then you're coming up with a very interesting news, offtake agreement with Korean steel giant SAH Group. And they are also working with SpaceX contractor for your molybdenum. And Almonty stands more for tungsten, was my understanding. But then you're coming up with this molybdenum deal. And yeah, but what this mean for the company?
Thank you very much for having me, Joe. I think, yes, we are sort of first and foremost tungsten guys. We've done this for a long time, and we're considered to be the leaders outside of China and Russia, and we have a long history, track record in tungsten. And tungsten, we've always perceived as being the more it's a sort of high class metal, and moly is always considered to be like a middle class metal. That's how we've always seen it. But as we've discovered, the United States many years ago transitioned more towards moly because of its cost, even though now moly is more valuable than tungsten, bizarrely. And we traditionally find often moly and tungsten associated together in deposits. What's unique in Korea is, for some bizarre geological reason, the tungsten is on one side, and 150 meters from our existing infrastructure is the moly. So they are completely separate, but still joined, if that makes any sense. So we mine the tungsten, we don't really get any byproducts of it. We have bismuth, gold, silver. And the moly is completely separate, as I said, and very cheap for us to get into then. And I think we have to remember in mining now, especially in democracies, and especially how the world is now trying to diversify, that domestic consumers are also important. Often we neglect to really try and understand what our position is. And SEAH, who are the second largest moly oxide smelter in the world, they've just announced they're building a brand new plant in Texas, which is they're going to produce the moly steel for SpaceX and for basically US defense and aerospace missiles. Basically, this is what it's used for. And they need a transparency of supply chain. There's something quite wonderful about having a customer that's less than a 2-hour drive away. No customs, no boats, no bill of ladens, no import export duties. It's just they like it because they can come see us anytime we want, and they know what's going on. And we like it because we are respecting the fact that we are in a country that is a voracious consumer of moly. So it makes sense. People said, oh, why you do for life of mine? Well, moly is very different from tungsten. Moly has a quoted price on the LME, on Platts. It's a marginal contract. So the price is not really a negotiation. It's just, it is what it is. And the floor price is because I firmly believe, whether I'm right or wrong, only time will tell, but I firmly believe that for strategic metal mines in very key sectors, which of course moly in this instance for defense is, you have to know that whatever the market throws at you, I'm not saying China, I'm just saying whoever is a vast producer of X can't put a lot of that material into the market to bring pricing down as we saw in the 80s and 90s. This ensures that no matter what happens, we still emerge successfully.
Mhm.
And I think all of my customers are now grasping this concept. This idea that governments are going to subsidize, mines is just, even China have stopped doing it. But I think this is the way that the future is going to unfold, is that we can work with our customers with a logical basis that we can ensure our survival. As long as we have grade and longevity in reserves, we can weather storms.
Mhm. Mhm. So coming back to this deal, this mean you should produce, or end of 2026, this is a very short period. First question. Second is, can you use, when you come to this mine and you say, on the one side is tungsten, on the other side is moly. Is this a total different production circle, or can you use some stuff from the tungsten, from the mine, from the plant itself, to tungsten, and also for moly, or is it how this works? So
Well, firstly, it's fully permitted. So there's no more permits to get for the moly. It's done. Environment, mining permit, all finished. So normally that's what takes you time in democracies.
yeah,
So,
that's
so
true.
this is complete. We can actually share underground infrastructure to bring material to surface. So that's also another box ticked. We are going to build a different plant. Still flotation, classic copper flotation plant for moly. There's nothing, not reinventing the wheel. So we're going to need permits for that building, but it's a building permit. That's a straightforward, put the plans in, the government's happy, build away. So it's a question of construction of that plant. A lot of work has already been done on this site. We are working with SEAR regarding the funding. It's not a JV, but obviously we've been now given access to Korean bank credit, which is very important. And SEAR's view is, whatever this costs to get open as fast as possible, they're going to help. They just said, got to get it open. We need it. We need this material.
But this is an interesting point. Do you have some calculation on it? How much the plant will cost, and what this mean also then when it comes to execution of this offtake agreement? What this mean on the yearly revenue bottom line?
We have, obviously I have to be very careful because we are a public company, but the costs are very comparative to our tungsten, because they are essentially going to be passing very similar tonnage. They're using the same type of process, and moly behaves in many ways very similar to tungsten. So I think from a cost per unit, from a cost of the actual capex for the plant, it's all very similar to tungsten. And also in terms of revenue, of earnings, the grade is not quite as high as the tungsten, but it's not far off. And that's actually in a JORC. We have historical data. What I'm going to probably do is I'm now going to do a small amount of drilling just to convert some of that inferred into measured and indicated. And that's really a regulatory process for Australia and for Canada. It's not a requirement for us to build. We have a good sense of the plan because we're essentially replicating what we've just done. And when you've done something already once, you tend to be much better at it the second time. You learn as you go. And we've certainly, been on a very steep learning curve in Korea, building one plant, building a second one, and now the government is fully behind this, and it's an important strategic metal for an important Korean company. We expect it to go relatively smoothly, but as an operator, I don't want to jinx it.
Okay.
So,
but to bring me a little bit more into the numbers of tungsten, okay, you say it is similar to the moly, is similar to the tungsten. So, but how the tungsten numbers looks like, so that I can.
Well, the cost of the plants in tungsten was around about 125 million US for the plants and for the underground works. We would expect the moly to be very similar. In terms of revenue, the moly won't go into phase 1 or phase 2. It just goes straight to one phase, full output. and it would generate around about 5,600 tons of moly, which if we say current price of what, $21 a pound. So you have to get a calculator out and work out, but that's very similar to when we've opened phase 2 at tungsten. So now we've doubled up our revenue with this project. In terms of earnings, we would expect the margin to run at the grade it is somewhere in the region of 20 to 25%, which is slightly higher than, you know, a more traditional mine of around 20%, but not as high as our tungsten. Our tungsten will actually run the margin higher than that because of its grade. But all the same, I think if you're using very broad numbers, phase 1 in tungsten will produce X. As soon as we commission in a couple of months, fingers crossed, we will then work on phase 2. So we'll go from revenue of X to revenue of 2X. The moly will then take us to revenue of 4X, which means our short-term, medium-term growth is all internal. We're not having to look for targets to fund growth, to fuel the growth. And that's, I think, a very important distinction. Plus, of course, the Korean government also wants us to build a downstream for the tungsten, a tungsten oxide plant. So my focus over the next 5 years is going to be driving this growth internally. And that, by its very nature, is far more financially efficient than going out looking for targets, buying someone else's problems, which is what we've normally traditionally done. We've gone and found someone else's problems and then go about the business of fixing it. This, to me, is a far more effective way of using capital.
Okay, understandable. And the share price is really reacting positive today on these numbers. So we are at the moment 128 Canadian dollar. That's very great. Yesterday you closed 110. So and in general, the whole performance since June, July last year, 100% up. Great thing. So the people really get now into the story. I think your market cap is now roughly 300 million or something.
I think it's a shade over, but you have to remember as well that Canada, you know, many companies, hundreds of companies in Canada, unfortunately have a sub valuation because there is very limited capital available in that market. The liquidity in Canada is the last decade has really taken a beating. And we find ourselves in a situation where, for what we're building and for the support, the governmental support we have, we are, according to, you know, say Spin Capital did a research, and there will be other analysts that are currently going to initiate, the valuation is that we currently set out quite low. But we're in a market that we're in. It is what it is. My job is to keep attracting capital to it, because I think the value needs to start reflecting a real valuation. And one of our moves to the US is to evaluate finding greater access to capital inflows into the stock. It's no fault of Canada. Just, you know, 10 plus years ago, they changed the rules on the trading. And I know there's big campaigns by many companies, and you saw to change that back, but because it really decimated capital in Canada. And so there are hundreds of companies that are woefully undervalued. And I don't think we've been immune to that.
Was also the move to America that you get easier than maybe granted from the Department of Defense or something?
Yes, I mean, it makes sense for me. I mean, we have to remember the geopolitics that exists in the world. These tensions are not getting any calmer. And I love Canada, but they're very polite. And so if anyone messes around with me, because I've got the biggest tungsten project, you know, which of course is used extensively in defense, the Canadians are more likely to apologize. Whereas if I'm an American company, you know, they're a little bit more, you know, you're ring-fenced a little better, I think is the best way to put it. And I think that could be important in the future. I think also it gives us greater access to US government support. Our customers are predominantly US based. Even if they're owned by European companies, we supply into the US. A lot of our shareholders are American. And so it felt this was the natural time to now relocate, to redomicile into the US. I think we've done our time in Canada. It's time to now put ourselves on a bigger stage. We're going to be a major defense contract, supplier. We will be considered more of a defense stock than a commodity stock being in the US. And I think that's important. And if we can just capture just a tiny fraction of retail in the US, the stock is going to explode, as well it should.
Yeah, and yeah, I absolutely agree with you. It brings me a little bit to my mind. I was last week in Vancouver to Metals Forum and so on, and some guy brings up some pages about which commodity is produced by which country. For example, germanium, gallium, graphite, and antimony is produced mainly by China, and they make now export ban on it. It's also, I think, for me, is more to also show President Trump maybe if he go against China, against tariffs and so on, maybe they're coming up with more export bans on other commodities. And interesting thing is he brings also a slide in which other commodities are very dominated by China, and molybdenum is one of them countries commodities where China is the major producer. Tungsten for sure, we know. And we know exactly that both are very problematically, or very the need for this material is in the defense, and from them I think it's very strategic where you produce your tungsten, especially when you looks now more on the countryside and say, hey, when you will support your supply chain or your defense department, then you need also to secure the supply of these materials. So, and this is a very interesting move, and you have both very important materials in your portfolio, and that's the reason why we're now coming a little bit to your main product, I must say, tungsten. And interesting fact for me is also that you run a mine in Portugal. And for me, it's very interesting. And I was in this mine 2006, 7, 8 or something. I visited this on a property visit with PMI in the old days when they get owned by the company. And it's a very interesting mine. They runs now, I think, for over 130 years or something unbelievable. And this was one of my first property visits. And so you're in the tungsten business. You know the market very well. And what's your plans now on the tungsten side too, beside Pernis Square, or maybe is there upside potential, or what you are planning in the tungsten space?
Well, Joe, I mean, it's funny you were there in 2006, 7 with PMI, because it was about that time that I took control of PMI. And when I first owned Portugal the first time around, and then we sold it for 21 times earnings to Sojitz. And then 4 years ago, we bought it back for $1. So, I have a long history with Portugal. Look, it makes money, not a huge amount. It's an old mine, it's an expensive mine, but it produces a particularly high grade form of wolframite. And I've always said to people who didn't really know us, if we can make money in an underground mine in Portugal with a grade of somewhere in the region of 0.13, what on earth are we going to be able to do with an underground mine in Korea with a grade of 0.55? So I think, besides, the fact that I'm extremely charming, put that to one side and just say, what can we actually do with what we have in Korea? And as I said earlier, we're going to expand it to phase 2 once we start work this year, when phase 1 commissions. In Portugal, the EU is currently assessing our application to fund the opening of level 4, which we should hear about shortly. The EU seems to have had a bit of a pivot. you know that last year they went through, they were going to make it easier to mine and all these things. And they found that there was no real appetite for that amongst the member states. So they've kind of pivoted to existing mines, especially strategic existing mines, to say, how can we help? Because I don't need additional permits to expand Portugal. I don't need any additional buildings. I don't make no more impact on the environment. You know, it's like it never happened. It's a kind of silent growth, which of course the EU likes because then no one is going to get upset because it's just business as usual. So we'll look at opening level 4. What does level 4 do for us? Well, it'll increase our output by about 40% because not because we're going to pass any more tonnage, but because the grade is going to be higher. Mm-hmm. Normally what we find in Portugal after 136 years is as you start each new level, the grade is pretty good. And then as you work through the level, it gets worse and worse and worse. Mm-hmm. Our current area in level 3 is at the end of the life cycle, so it has about 20 years left. It's bizarre, I can say, that a level has a life cycle of nearly 50, 60 years, but that's what, it's about 50 years, each level. Mm-hmm. And so level 4 will give us a good bump in grade to start. And I hadn't even thought about doing the expansion for at least another 10 years because it costs money. But the EU was saying, no, the mines department, can you really look at this? Maybe we can do something a little earlier. So we put in an application. Let's see if we're successful. In Korea, the Korean government has indicated that they would rather like us to get involved in developing a tungsten oxide plant, a downstream, because currently 97% of the oxide in Korea comes from China. It's not saying that Korean companies have to buy from us. And that's a very important distinction. They just want Korean companies to have a choice. So I'm not traditionally in the oxide business. To be honest, everyone I know who's in it never seems very happy. Mm-hmm. That may be because I'm their supplier and they're my customer. But if I did it, and it looks increasingly likely like we will, it'll be a very much, made to order project. So when we have orders, we'll run it. And when we don't, the government has already gifted us land about 28 kilometers from the mine. They're willing to bring infrastructure, power, deliver with environmental permits, potable water, so that they'll prepare the site. And we are, working through a plan, a sort of a scoping study of the project. I think, again, sometimes you have to respect that you're in a jurisdiction that is also a consumer of the material you produce. Tungsten is only consumed in very few places: the United States, the EU, predominantly Austria and Germany, Japan, and South Korea. And that's it. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's some in India, but we're talking about major consumers. So at the moment, there are no tungsten mines in the US. And the ones that are there, they're okay. They're not the greatest. There are 3 mines in Europe. We have one of them. The other one is owned by Sandvik, Midasur. And you have no mines in Korea and no mines in Japan. So we're opening the world's largest tungsten mine in Korea, which is the biggest consumer of tungsten per capita in the world. Mm-hmm. We have to respect that strategic metals are important to everyone. Everyone is friends with this. Everyone has the same problems. So yes, 45% of our output is going to the United States, which is the biggest defense ally of South Korea. But we have to also understand that the other 55%, I'm going to earmark for domestic consumption. Mm-hmm. And so I think if you ask me in mining, what has been the biggest change in the last decade is I now have to think about things that I never even contemplated a decade ago. A decade ago, I get a permit, I start digging, I produce, everyone's happy. We're like the 7 dwarves in Snow White. We sing to work, no problems. But now we have communities to consider. And this isn't just about giving money or jobs. This is about integration into the community. We have to think about environmental development, not just preservation, but replanting, reforestation. We have to think about cleaner energy, reducing carbon emissions. We have to think about the fact that we can't move a mine. You can move a widget factory, you can't move a mine. And I have to think about not only bureaucracy, which becomes more and more intense in democracies every year, but also the politics of what I'm doing. Because if we have companies in a country that consume this material and I'm producing that material, that's a recipe for drama unless you are fully in conversation with those companies about potential supply. And we never had to think about that before. We were in a global market, which we still are, except for strategic metals. That global market is essentially dissipating before our eyes. It's every man for himself, it seems. And there's another reason I'm coming to the US, because it affords me a level of protection, but I'm also respectful enough to work on my relationships. And that's why I have a deal with Sayar for moly. They're a great Korean company. It made complete sense. It was not done in a week. It was done over many, many months of discussion, diligence, all these things. But this is what you have to remember. If you're in this business of strategic metals, you got to respect the neighborhood. That's very important. You should never forget that.
So we are still at 25 minutes, so we must come now to a little bit to our end. So, but to summarize a little bit, what are really the next steps for the company? So what we can expect from the company this year and maybe next year, and what are the plans?
Phase one will open roughly 2 months, commission. So we'll start seeing outputs during this year, which is good. I will start work on phase two immediately underground. As soon as I can start phase one, phase two, and it will take about a year to work through the infrastructure underground for phase two. I'll know hopefully in the next 2 months, 2 to 3 months, whether the EU have greenlit my expansion of level 4 in Panascara. We should be more advanced with the tungsten oxide in Korea, so there'll be more news about that. And during this year, I hope to put together the debt package for the moly. So there's a lot of work on. And let's see what happens in the US. Maybe they love us. I mean, you never know. But I do know we have something that's very valuable to many people. And I know right now that Plancy is very happy that they've made this decision, because many years ago, they looked to diversify from China. And they were one of the only voices that said, we must do it. Not a reflection of our Chinese colleagues, but because we have to be independent. And so they've taken, a lot of criticism in a sense for this approach. But right now with Samdong opening, they looked like they really knew what they were doing. And I think that's a fair assessment. They're ahead of the curve on this. And I think they won't be the last ones. I think will now start to be much more proactive in developing real solutions.
Yeah, understandable. One of the really last question is, you said before you have also shareholders in the US and so on. How's the shareholder structure really looks like?
We have no institutions, no big funds. I've always steered away from rich uncles. I find that the committees that come with them are detrimental to being nimble enough to build a mine in a democracy. Trying to explain strategy is not easy to 6 guys in a room who work for a shareholder. It's permitting in a democracy I describe as skiing down a mountain doing the slalom, and you can't touch one gate on the way down. Because you can't ruffle any feathers. You have to find a very fluid way of navigating through multiple bureaucracies. My shareholder base, I'm obviously one of the largest shareholders. I put in over $13 million of my own money into this. So I'm standing by this story. Friends of the family, people who are attracted to this story, Plancy, Deutsche Rohstoff. So we very much kept this as an independent approach. How long that stays for, I don't know. I don't need money. And I think I can continue doing it the way I do it. KfW IPEX, who backed Samdong, who would think a small company like me would get the German government to back me? They've never done a tungsten project, certainly not one as small, and certainly not 80% of project cost. So we really jumped some hurdles to get that. And I think that was testament to the work of the team. But right now, my independence is my commitment. I have a commitment to that. But entering the US, who knows what happens? I think there's going to be a lot of love for us, given that from January 1, 2027, you cannot apply for US defense contracts if you don't have a source of tungsten that doesn't come from Iran, North Korea, China, or Russia, which basically means us. And it's America. You know, it's they are a very liquid capital market. Anything can happen.
Louis, thank you for the first introduction. It's our first interview here, first introduction to your company. It's a very great day. As I say, the share price really react. At the moment, we are 123. Before it was 128. It was the day high. But very interesting thing. Ja, das war erste Intro, Almonty Industries. Es geht um Tungsten und um Molybden. Tungsten, fangen wir gleich einmal mit dem an. Sie haben die alte Penasquare Mine auch gekauft, wo ich schon einmal war, 2006. Da gibt es sicher auch irgendwo ein Video noch, wo ich dort dementsprechend in der Mine rumlaufe. 136 Jahre alt, unglaublich, wie lange das läuft. Einer der ältesten Minen, die es überhaupt noch in Betrieb gibt. Sehr spannend, super Sache. Was allerdings heute wirklich das ausschlaggebende Teil war, oder warum jetzt auch die Aktie heute so abgeht, ich habe gerade vorhin einen Chart gezeigt, 100% Performance in den letzten 6 Monaten, er spricht auch Bände dafür. Sie haben heute ein Offtake-Agreement gemacht mit dem koreanischen Steel-Giganten und SpaceX-Contractor. Das ist, glaube ich, das, was keiner bis jetzt am Radar gehabt hat. Molybden war ein Thema, das zwar da war, aber nicht wirklich im Vordergrund gestanden ist. Im Vordergrund gestanden ist immer Tungsten. Das ist jetzt eigentlich, was jetzt der zweite Sache eigentlich aufgebracht hat. Und er hat es vorher sehr gut beschrieben. Sie starten ja jetzt mit der Produktion. Also in 2 Monaten soll die erste Phase im Prinzip abgeschlossen sein. Ich habe jetzt mal, wo haben wir die Fotos von der ganzen Mine? Hier haben wir die Fotos, wo es jetzt gerade im Aufbau, die ganze Mine, Mühle und so weiter. Und in 2 Monaten sollte die Commission von der ersten Phase durch sein. Dann wird produziert Phase 1 vom Tungsten in Korea. Das zweite ist, dann geht es gleich unmittelbar in die Phase 2 rein, damit sie diese zweite Produktionserweiterung machen. So, und das Molybden gibt ja die Chance, quasi dasselbe, was in Phase 2 dann produzieren auf Tungsten, noch einmal auf der Moly-Seite zu produzieren. Er hat gesagt, das ist eine sehr interessante Konstruktion geologische, denn die Moly ist eigentlich unabhängig vom Tungsten, allerdings ist nur 150 Meter entfernt. Das heißt, Sie können Teile dieser Infrastruktur natürlich benutzen. Deswegen ist auch so, dass Sie glauben, dass sie Ende 2026 schon mit der Produktion beginnen können. Es ist ein strategisches Metall, Tungsten und Moly. Beides wird in Rüstungsindustrie benötigt. Gerade mit diesen Problemen, was wir geopolitisch haben, ist es extrem wichtig, dass man unabhängige Sources hat, nicht nur alles von China geliefert wird. Und ich habe es vorher auch im Chart gezeigt, in der Grafik, bei Moly und bei Tungsten ist China einer der größten oder war nicht sogar der größte Produzent mit einem riesen Marktanteil. Und das belastet natürlich vor allem auch oder beunruhigt natürlich vor allem auch die ganzen in die Verteidigungsministerien der diversen Länder. Deswegen haben sie auch den Sitz noch in die USA verlegt. Das war, glaube ich, ein smarter Move, weil nämlich dort natürlich auch der Zugang zu diesen Fördermitteln stärker ist. Und ich glaube, gerade unter Trump werden wir sehen, dass diese Industrie dort sehr stark gefördert wird. Das heißt, man kann auch damit rechnen, dass möglicherweise Fördermittel aus dem Bereich kommen, um ihre Mühle und ihre Ding zu verbessern. Auch spannend ist, was ich nicht gewusst habe, bei einer Square geht es darum, der wollte eigentlich gar nicht wirklich jetzt die Phase 4 oder das Level 4, eigentlich nicht Phase 4, sondern die Level 4 machen. Er hat aber, die EU hat ihn quasi ein bisschen gedrängt mit dem Strategic Act, das sich anzuschauen, und es kann durchaus sein, dass es auch hier Fördermittel von der EU gibt, um das Level 4 schneller zu eröffnen. Also man sieht rundherum um die Welt, wollen die Länder oder gehen die Länder immer mehr über diese Supply Chain Issues, die es gibt mit einzelnen Metallen, Commodities, zu fixen. So, und das ist eigentlich genau das Interessante ist, was man sieht. Es kommt Geld in den Sektor rein. von einer Gegend, wo man eigentlich glaubt hat, dass das nicht reinkommt. Und das macht es eigentlich das Ganze spannend. Um das kurz zusammenzufassen, die Aktionärstruktur ist sehr gut. Er hat keine großen strategischen Investoren drinnen, sondern er hat halt, er ist selber einer der größten Aktionäre. Freut mich, weil da weiß man wenigstens, dass er auch das für sich selber ja tut und ist nicht ein Vorstand, der nur Arbeitnehmer ist, sondern halt wirklich er weiß, er tut es für sich eigentlich selber sehr positiv zu sehen. Also kurz Zusammenfassung, der Deal heute, das Offtake Agreement, glaube ich, ist aus dem Blauen gekommen, mit dem hat keiner gerechnet. Man kann damit mit diesem Deal 2026 quasi die Produktion verdoppeln. Das ist genau das, was eigentlich der Wahnsinn ist. Also das heißt, 26 schon die ganzen Produktionszahlen, was wir jetzt geglaubt haben, sind hinfällig. Und damit schaut das ganz, ganz anders aus, als was man vorher eigentlich gemeint hat. Und ja, das macht es eigentlich wahnsinnig spannend. Und deswegen können wir News rechnen in 2 Monaten ungefähr First Commission von Phase 1, dann geht es gleich in Phase 2 über. Dann geht es darum, ob sie eine Wolfram-Oxide Mühle Plant aufbauen in Korea. Da ist scheinbar auch Korea sehr stark dahinter. Ja, dann geht es noch darum, ob Planisquare Erweiterung ist, ob das die EU dementsprechend fördert. Und ja, extrem spannend. Yeah, very, very intensive interview. Thank you for all this information, Luis. Good luck with your developments. Share price so far, as I said, looks very good. Also, the development, I think, really for the most people, these Molly deals come out of the blue. Share price reaction looks like this. And yeah, and when you come to a calculation that you maybe double your production out of the Korean mine end of 2026 or say 27, it's yeah, unbelievable, and that's clear by the reaction is so high. And then hopefully you will grant us some interest also in the US, and then yeah, the share price should react much better than we see now.
No, I hope so. Thank you very much, Joe, for having me.
Thank you and have a good day.
All right, take care. Thank you.